name is Ashley Pallerin, and I'm an Extension Program Specialist with Prairie View A&M University in Prairie View, Texas. We are located about 40 minutes northwest of Houston, and I specialize in livestock production, but my love, my desire, my research has been in goat production. There's a lot to consider when raising livestock. Especially goat production. They are not just little cows. They are their own animal, and they deserve to be treated as such. So they have their own special needs. So today I'm going to give kind of some broad overview of goat production itself, some things to consider, some health concerns to look out for, and just some general topics that that you may want to explore a little later if you're considering entering into the meat goat production and management system. All right, so common question, what is a meat goat? It's any breed or crossbreed of goat that's used for meat production. So goats can be used for a variety of things such as fiber and milk as well. They could be dual purpose, but what I'm going to be talking about today are specifically meat goat production, So the first thing you should really do before you actually purchase your animals, or even if you consider modifying your land, is identify and secure a market. Start with the end in mind. In any livestock operation, you want to know where you're going to make your money, and the market end is where you're going to make your money. So making sure you know how you're going to get rid of that animal. Is it through direct sales? Is it through a sale barn? Is it through a cooperative that you're working with and you all are going to offload it or ship it to another state? Do you have all of those regulations? What are those costs that are involved? So you want to identify a market and kind of work through the numbers first to make sure that it can be profitable for you. Because one thing about livestock production, if it's not profitable, it's a hobby. And we all love a hobby, but the goal in specifically in this type of production is to make money. I don't know anybody who doesn't feel like they could or would or want to make more money. So if you're getting into this business as a business, you want to make sure that you have a way to make money. They used to say don't borrow money at all to start a goat enterprise, but I think that the market and the demand is changing, and we can see it over time that goat demand is increasing. So I've changed that to say don't borrow a large amount of money to start your goat enterprise. Unless you're familiar with it and you've done it before and you kind of know where all your hurdles are. Goats provide quite a bit of challenges, especially with fencing and maintaining them within a certain area. The joke about goats is if you can blow smoke through it, the goats will get through it. So making sure you have proper fencing and making sure you're prepared before you actually delve deep into an investment. And that should really go for any kind of enterprise. You really need to do your homework. And then cover your backside. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So first, you want to identify a secure market. Who, where, what, and when. When are you going to get rid of those animals? What time frame, what size, what do your consumers want? Where are you going to offload them? Do you have the transportation needs? And who's going to help you? Who's going to offload those animals? So those are some things to consider. Always cover your backside means having a backup plan, knowing your limits, and referring back to 1 and 2. I accidentally missed one of the slides, but the second one was don't go into extreme debt for this operation. You want to make sure that you have done some trials and tests and make sure before you move on and go into debt, because the market could fluctuate and you don't want to be caught in a situation where you owe people money and you may have had a parasite outbreak or something and you don't have the means to pay that back. So let's talk a little bit briefly about the U.S. goat industry. If we look here in the middle, we can see that meat goat production for small and large producers, whether they're commercial or hobby, is the bulk of goat production. There are some people who do dairy, show stock, show wethers. Some of them use it for brush management, for fiber, and then there's a small portion who use them as pets. But a majority of goats in the U.S. are actually used for commercial meat production. So what does a meat goat look like? I know everybody's seen kind of goats running around, or maybe you have, or maybe you haven't. But how do you know the difference? What does it matter? So the first one that everybody is probably most known for, most common, is most popular and common, is the Boer goat. That one was actually not native here. It's not present here in the U.S. until the 1990s, when they brought 5 Boer goats over from Africa. Prior to that, Spanish was the common meat goat in Texas, and that was the preferred goat of choice in this area. They decided to bring the Boer down to see if they could increase the size and the meat production of the Spanish goat, and it did that. But then the Boer also came with some issues as far as parasites and other health issues that the Spanish goats were able to tolerate and manage. So over time, we've been working through that, but you'll hear a lot about Boers, and sometimes they won't be 100% Boer. They may be a Boer cross, or they may just be a percentage Boer, because they give a good size. You know, it's kind of like everybody wants the Angus steak, but the difference between an Angus burger and a Hereford burger still tastes the same. It's beef. But where that meat sits on that animal is really the target. Also at the bottom, they have Kikos. If you look in the picture, that all white goat is a Kiko goat. It's made between, it actually has some dairy influence. So when you're talking about mothering ability, they're really good motherers, but because they have that dairy influence, they tend to be a little larger in stature, but a lot thinner and more sunken in. So they have a body conformation type of more of like a dairy goat. So sometimes they'll put a Boer on that to kind of flesh them out a little more. So this is 100% full-blood Boer goat. If you look at the facial pattern, that solid red head and that white body, that is the telltale sign of a Boer goat. When you start getting into percentages, you'll start seeing not just the solid white head, but it'll kind of start to diminish a little bit. But now you also have a little bit of that brown or that tan around the rump area. So now we're not getting that solid white body. We're starting to see that that it's not 100%. So then this one is a 75% Spanish, and 75% Boer and 25% Pygmy, which means this one is going to be much smaller in stature, and but it's going to give you that depth of body and that shape of a Boer goat. So you can see it's nice around the top line and kind of full in the belly, but it's going to give you a smaller goat compared to a traditional Boer goat or even a Spanish goat. And then this one is 75% Boer and 25% Nubian. Nubian is similar to a Boer goat. They both have African origin, but a Nubian is what we consider a dairy goat, which means they are high in dairy production. So if you were looking to amp up a little bit of colostrum production, or you wanted to increase, mothering abilities, then some people like to cross with a dairy, and because Nubians are closely related to Boer as far as their origin, a lot of people like that Nubian mix. And this is a 50-50 split between a Boer and a Nubian. And this is just your typical Spanish goat. This one has no Boer influence. I would say no Boer influence, but since the 1990s, there was a large influx of wanting that Boer genetics. So it's really difficult to find Spanish goats that are not even a small percentage Boer, because they did such heavy breeding with the Spanish to try to make them a little bigger and a little more hardy. So most of the goats in Texas now probably have some Boer influence down the line. Now, whether you can track that or not is anybody's guess. And this is what a full-blood Boer buck looks like. Look at how solid that body is. So they are a little bit more compact. So when you're talking about cuts and cuts of meat after it's been harvested, then your Boers are really going to give you a more desirable retail type of cuts, more meat on the bones. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about market meat goats themselves, kind of what we need. So some factors that are important to ensure a successful enterprise are facilities, your animal nutrition, reproduction and health, and of course, marketing. Marketing will always go in there. Again, that's how we make our money. So nutrition is the highest cost associated with production. I will say, of course, feeding an animal and getting them to the point where they are healthy is going to cost you depending on where they are. If you get a less thrifty animal from the sale barn, it's going to take a lot to convert them into a thriftier animal. So nutrition, you really need to consider how much money you want to invest in nutrition, and that should help determine how much you're going to be able to put towards your animal production. Especially kind of in South Texas, where there's not a lot of lush green pasture. Well, I know y'all got rain a little while back, so y'all may have a little bit, but you know, over time, there's not like in East Texas where they have lush green pasture a majority of the year. You know, you'll have to do a lot of supplemental feeding, a lot of hay supplements. So we want to make sure that we budget in for that. So you want to divide, when you're talking about does or the females, you want to divide them into feeding groups: dry, which means they are not producing milk; lactating, which means they are producing milk or recently kidded; and then body condition score. I'll talk more about body condition score a little bit later, but body conditions range from a 1 to a 5, with 3 being in the middle and ideal, 1 being very thin, 5 being very obese or fat. Some other things to consider, because you'll separate your does and your bucks, or your males and your females. Bucks can get urinary calculi. So you want to make sure that their calcium and phosphorus ratio is about a 1 to 2 or a 2 to 1 to keep that urinary tract clear. And always, everyone should have clean water. For kids, I would say creep feeding is optional, but if you're looking for a little bit more rapid growth, then you should creep feed until they're marketed with pelleted food. Okay, so the stages of production that you should feed on are dry, breeding, early gestation or early pregnancy, and then late pregnancy, and then lactation. A lot of these will come in at about the same. We feed about a 16% crude protein pellets, in addition to them grazing on the pasture, and then hay, of course, ad libitum, or as just free. You want to free feed hay. Especially during the early gestation and breeding is when you really want to make sure that their nutrition is optimal. You want to give them the best chance to get pregnant, and you want to give them the best chance to stay pregnant. So you want to make sure that they're nutritionally sound for that. During the dry period between when you're weaning, or when you pull the animal from the mother, to their next breeding, that's considered their dry period. They have the lowest nutrition requirements there. They're eating to just maintain themselves and rebuild what was lost while they were nursing. So a good quality pasture would meet those requirement needs. Again, if it's at a time when we're having a drought, you want to make sure that you have good hay available, maybe supplement from time to time a little alfalfa, and have pellets with 16% crude protein. And of course, you can free feed minerals. During the breeding period, you want to increase feed intake for the first 2 to 3 weeks prior to breeding. This is known as flushing. And what flushing does is it increases the ovulation rate about 5 to 10%. So not a lot, but again, making sure they have the best nutrition right before breeding, that gives them an opportunity to have the best chance of conception. And what that consists of is about 1 pound per head per day of something like corn. And you'll monitor body condition scores. You don't want them to get too fat prior to breeding. Also, you don't want them to be too thin. You would feed that or do flushing according to their body condition. So early gestation is the first 100 days of pregnancy. So they have about a 5-month pregnancy period, so about 150 days. So it's similar to the dry feeding. You just want to take advantage of the forage and, of course, continue to monitor body condition scores. In the last 50 days, that's where the fetus grows the most. You get 70% of fetal growth. And in goats, twins are normal. So they'll have one baby, preferably in each, or usually in each uterine horn. So they're not only just taking care of themselves in one baby, they're taking care of themselves nutritionally in two babies. So this is the most critical time for feeding. So we definitely want to make sure that we are supplementing hay, that they're getting as much hay as they want, they're getting as much water as they want. And we can supplement 16% crude protein pellets, about a pound to a pound and a half per head per day. If you want to, you can also supplement a couple of pounds of corn in addition to that. So doe nutrition is the key to early kid growth. So lactation peaks at about 2 to 4 weeks. So the first week they'll have colostrum. First couple of days, that's that colostrum. You definitely want to make sure that your kid goats have access to colostrum, which means you'll have to look at your animals every day. Once you get out there, you want to make sure every morning, get your cup of coffee and you're looking. Every single animal, lay eyes on them. If you're missing one, you should go find that one. Sometimes when they are when they're about to give birth, if you just kind of have them in an open field, they like to isolate themselves. So if they are missing, if it's not a predator issue, it may be that they're going into labor. So you just want to know where they're laboring, just so you know to keep an eye on them because they are vulnerable at that point. So back to lactation. Lactation peaks at 2 to 4 weeks. You still want to utilize that pasture, and you want to feed at 4 to 5% of that body weight. So if possible, you want to increase their grain intake if you're feeding individually. If you are feeding a pasture full of goats that are kidding at different times, then I would say stick with your basic, 1 to 2 pounds per head of pelleted ration, just to avoid excessive eating of others. So for buck nutrition, we talked about urinary calculi. You want to always utilize pasture when available over grain. You want to monitor their body condition about 3 to 4 weeks prior to breeding. And you want to, they say 4 pounds of hay, but I say give it to them ad libitum. So whenever they're out of hay, give them more hay. And then about 2 pounds of grain per head. So they get a lot more nutrition than the does, and we're always monitoring their body. 14 to 16% crude protein, up to 60% total digestible nutrients, about 1% of ammonium chloride. All of these you should be able to find on your feed label. So you can take this and pair it up against the label that's on the feed and see where you are. The two most important parts are the crude protein ration, and then that calcium and phosphorus, that 2-to-1 ratio, or that 1-to-1 ratio. You definitely want to make sure that's in there. Too much grain and that ratio being off, they can cause some pretty serious issues. So now we move on to the kids. So after we got their parents together, now the kids are here. What are we supposed to do with the kids? So you can start kids on creek feed as soon as possible. They fed a 16% crude protein pelleted ration. Some of the kids will start to wean themselves before you actually wean. Common practice is to wean goats at 3 months of age. So around three months, when the herd average age is about 3 months, then that's when you will start to wean your animals. If you had some born late in the season, then you will wait. So I'm going to cycle back real quick because I know I talked about the breeding season. Unlike cattle, goats actually are seasonal breeders. So they actually come into heat in the fall. So between late August all the way through December, that's when they are in heat and can be bred. And then they have a 5-month gestation or 5-month pregnancy period, and then they'll go through a dry period and they'll start over. So, if you do what we call out of season breeding, sometimes that may take a little manipulation and time on your part, but we'll get to that when we talk about the marketing. Oh, I beat myself. I knew it was on a slide. But the estrus cycle is 18 to 21 days. So in a month, if you put the bucks out, they should be able to cycle in or go into heat at least once that month. Some of them may be able to cycle twice, which means they have one to two opportunities per month that they're with that buck to get pregnant. They're short day breeders, again, October through December. Some have started as early as August, depending on, weather conditions. And we already talked about flushing and how we want to increase ovulation or conception rates, and then monitoring body condition scores. All of these things can equal economic success. So with the, we talk a little bit about reproduction. You want to do the buck effect, which means you're synchronizing, you're using chemicals to synchronize all of your animals. They use this in artificial insemination. So if you wanted all of your animals to give birth within the same week or even within the same set of days, then you would synchronize them using hormones that you'll insert into the vagina, and then it'll cause them to cycle at a different time. And you can kind of control that. So that's a more of a controlled breeding season, and that's good for the market. And because honestly, with the way that their breeding time is set up, they miss a lot of major holidays. So they are being born when we want them about 7 to 8 months old. So this synchronization or this controlled breeding season is really a way that we can kind of manipulate their time frame without causing them any harm, of course. Just manipulate the time frame so that they can be ready at peak market time. Puberty is 6 to 10 months, which means as soon as you wean them, we generally separate the does and the bucks, because you'll start to see the kids mounting probably at about 6 months. So we don't want any kind of accidental issues. So just know, like in humans with puberty, separate those boys and girls. So you can do an accelerated kidding season where you can get 3 crops in 2 years. That's high input, a lot of financial input. And honestly, I don't recommend it, but it is an option. And then doing checks on your bucks, doing reproductive checks. So checking their semen, their libido, their testicles, getting their hooves trimmed and making sure they're in good body condition also sets up for healthy reproduction. So now a little bit about health considerations that we should take when looking at goat production. So the common complaint that a lot of veterinarians hear is, well, my goat just ain't acting right. Not there's a real serious problem, not there's bleeding. Nah, doc, my goat just ain't acting right. Now, I'm not a veterinarian, but I'm friends with veterinarians, and that's their common thing. They come in with, it just ain't acting right. So, if your goat is just as weird as me, so if they're acting weird or out of the norm, then you should definitely consult a veterinarian. If you don't have a veterinarian, you should find one. Get with your local extension agent or some other producers in the area to see who they use, because you can't handle everything. We can do a lot as producers, but we can't do everything. And sometimes we just need to know our limits. We need to understand when an emergency is beyond our abilities to give quality care to that animal. And we want to develop a good relationship with a veterinarian. If they know you and you're having an issue, they're going to be more likely to come out to your place versus somebody that they don't know their animals, and it's kind of a gamble. So having a good relationship is important. Some other diseases and problems that goats have are ketosis, overeating disease, parasites are number one, coccidia, foot rot or foot scald, pink eye, and general sickness. And then another one is CLs or caseous lymphadenitis. So ketosis can be controlled with feeding management. You just want to make sure that you're feeding the appropriate amount of food. You're not overfeeding grain. You're making sure that you're giving them the right amount of hay or enough hay to keep that rumen pH in balance. You can vaccinate for clostridial diseases. So you'll get a CD and T, so that's Clostridium plus tetanus 2 to 4 weeks prior. You'll give that to the does in their last trimester, and that will give immunity to the kids when they come out. So 2 to 4 weeks before they kid, you want to give them that CDT, and vitamin E and selenium as needed. A lot of times you can still, that's contained in a mineral block or a mineral feeder, and deworm if necessary. Consult a veterinarian before you deworm. Not all dewormers are safe for animals during pregnancy. There are 1 or 2 that are safe during pregnancy. Other ones will cause abortions. So please consult a veterinarian before deworming pregnant animals. So in general, when you're deworming, you want to establish a program, check fecal samples, and use a FAMANCHA card. In the picture, you can see that there's a very white or a pale color, and then a very bright pink color. This bright pink color is what we want that inside of that eyelid to look like. If we look here, we can see underneath that eyelid, very pale. And on this card, that means you need to deworm it immediately. If it's in this kind of pinkish area, it's going to tell you to monitor that animal to see if it gets better. So using that card really helps you to not overuse dewormers. And then you always want to make sure that you rotate your dewormers. So anthelmintics is a fancy word for dewormers. So they're divided into classes based off of their mode of action and chemical structure. So you have benzimidols, I always mess up this word. I just call them the I category, and the macrolytic lactones. Veterinarians know these words. I struggle. I'm human. But these are your 3 classes, and we're going to look at the next slide about FDA approved antiparasitics for sheep and goats. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but the active ingredient will really tell you kind of what class it falls in. So then you have your fenbendazoles, your levamisols, your ivermectins, and your moxidectins. All of these are different classes. So you don't want to use, levamisol or ivermectin and then sidectin in the same cycle. They're within the same class. That ivermectin and sidectin, they're in the same class. So you want to pick something that's in a different class. Maybe you'll use a valbazen or a Rumetel instead of ivermectin or sidectin. All right, so deworming, you want to generally hold, feed, or leave them in a pen for 12 to 48 hours after you deworm them. You want to rotate and clean those pastures as much as possible, and don't underdose. So this is, when we say underdose, that means follow the label. The label is the law. If it's for sheep and goats, then you must follow the exact label portions. You can use medications off-label. Again, that requires veterinary prescriptions or permission to do so. They would have to tell you what to do. As a rule, a lot of people used to use beef cattle dewormer, not recommended, but goats have a higher metabolism than some of the larger species, so it would take 3.5 times more, it would take more medication to give the same effect in goats. So that's also why we don't use cattle dewormer or anything other than what's labeled for goats. So around kidding areas, when it's time to kid, you want to dip, snip, and strip. So you want to dip the navel in iodine, you want to trim the navel, and then you want to inspect the udder that the goat will be nursing from, that the kid would be nursing from, just to make sure, which means pull the teat down and express some milk or pull some milk out. Make sure there's no chunks in there. They may no signs of mastitis, that the udder isn't warm or hot to the touch. And you want to make sure that that kid is nursing. All right, so if you're going to disbud, which means you're going to get rid of the horns that are in kid goats, you do that in about 7 to 10 days. There's a cauterizer, or you can, there's different instruments that you can use to get that done. Again, a veterinarian can do that for you, or there's ways that you can do it yourself. If you're going to castrate, you castrate club goats after 8 weeks. You can either ban them or do an open cut for, and that's club goats, so that's show goats. You do those after 8 weeks. If you are just putting them in a commercial herd and you don't want them to breed, within 2 to 3 months, we generally do an open castration on all of our bucks that are not going to go back into the breeding system. So any bucks that we're not keeping, we castrate them within the first month or two, or right after weaning. And you watch for scours, which is diarrhea. So you give booster vaccinations, you'll deworm them, you'll treat for coccidia. Cord can go in the water. You want them to be on full feed as quickly as possible. They say medicated feed if feasible, but I'm not a fan of medicated feed unless it's absolutely necessary. So just getting them on full feed, again, with hay being available, should do the trick. So other diseases of concern, this is caseous lymphadenitis. It's CL, and it's actually on the lymph node of animals. So you'll see them most commonly on the neck or on the hips. And if you see that, send that goat back where it came from. That's actually something, it's very contagious. You don't want it to rupture. Once you see it start losing hair, where you can see right here in this area where you'll start seeing scabbing and it's losing its hair, that means it's about to rupture. And the pus that's inside is infected with that bacteria. And once it ruptures and is in the soil or on the ground, other goats can contract that. And not only do they have external lesions, but they can get them on the inside and on their organs. And once they have CL, they can never get rid of it. So if you see an animal at a show or not at a show, but even at the sale barn that has kind of like a mark or looks like a scab on their neck, be very conscious, because that could be just a puncture, or it really could be a scab that they lanced and is healed and the hair has grown back over it. So that animal could potentially bring CL onto your farm, and you definitely don't want to do that. CAE is another highly contagious viral disease. So it causes kind of arthritis and encephalitis, so some head neurological issues. And its primary mode of transportation is colostrum. So when those kids are feeding on that doe, that's when they can pick it up if they have an infected mother. So there's no treatment for it, but you can do supportive care. And then some forms of CAE can be fatal to that animal. So you definitely want to do checks to make sure that CAE is not present in your herd or any animals that you are picking up. So now we're going to talk a little bit about marketing. I know I've touched on it here or there, but whether you're doing club goats or meat goats or show goats or meat goats, again, you want to understand your market and the needs of your market. So understanding the time of the year that is desirable for you to have your animals, the size, weight and sex, ethnic demands, commercial markets. With some ethnic demands, there are some ethnic groups that don't want you to have any kind of piercing, so no ear tags, no tattoos, no identifying markers on them as well. So if you're going to target that ethnic group that doesn't want any of those markers, then you need to make sure that you're adhering to what they want so that you can get the best price for that animal. Generally, 100 pounds of goats will translate into about 50 to 60 pounds of carcass. So just because you have a larger animal doesn't necessarily mean that that carcass weight is going to flesh out. So that's why you also want to make sure that your animal's body conditions stay in about a 3, because that will give you the best estimate for how much meat is on that carcass. Where if you have an animal that's very obese and very fleshy, how much of that is going to get discarded or rendered because it's just fat covering the same amount of muscle. So you want to make sure that you're targeting you're feeding your animals to match your target market. So real quick, I know this is a lot of days and I know it's old, but this is just kind of an example. These are ethnic holiday calendars. So for Easter, a lot of people like goat for Easter. So that would be April 12th. If you are trying to get an animal by April 12th, you would have to have it bred in May or June. Now that's outside of that fall breeding time that we were talking about. So you would actually have to either leave a buck in there with those animals and hope that they cycle, hope that that buck's presence in there will cycle them in and they can do natural conception, or you can do what's called estrus synchronization and do artificial insemination, which we have some programs about that here at Prairie View to help you understand the artificial insemination process. So we haven't been doing them the past couple of years because of COVID, but this year we are hopeful that we can bring that training session back. So be on the lookout for that program, and we're also trying to start one in beef cattle as well, so that you can understand the process and potentially get to do some hands-on with artificial insemination on live animals. But I would say check out an ethnic holiday calendar market if you don't already have people that you're direct selling to get a feel for some other opportunities to offload your meat animals. They say marketing of goat is not well characterized, means that we are not as cohesive as the beef industry. We are growing and we are getting there, but the market itself is not, we don't have a tagline of beef, it's what's for dinner, a beef consortium that is really pushing hard to assist producers with marketing, but it's getting there. People are starting to see the demand grow, and hopefully we're making some strides as far as global marketing goes. The purchasers of meat goats are generally ethnic consumers. So Africans, Hispanics, Middle Eastern. I would say the traditional American, or those that were born in America and not necessarily eating a lot of goat meat, are still trying to be convinced. I still have a lot of my friends who are like, I don't like goat meat, I don't do it. But then they'll go to a Jamaican restaurant or something and they'll be exposed to it, they'll try it, and they'll say, hey, I didn't know it was like this, I didn't know it was good. So there's a lot of what we call acculturation, or the sharing of cultural norms that's happening, and I think that's why we're starting to see the demand grow. So continue to share your cultures with others, and hopefully that will increase demand, continue to increase demand over time. Also, different ethnic groups prefer different types of goat meats. I know a lot of my African friends prefer a very mature old goat that is a little musky. It's not my taste preference, but I do like younger, more tender goats if we're gonna make like a stew or another meal like that. So again, knowing the animal age, the cut, their preparation style, that all goes into your marketing plan. So when we talk about marketing options, you have like a live, or you can sell the meat. So live, it's direct to consumer. You're selling it to a friend, to a neighbor, or another market channel such as a trader, an auctioneer, or directly to a local slaughter facility. Whereas meat, the meat goes directly from a licensed plant into a retail store. So it's done through an inspected facility, and then it's pushed out to a retail store. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you can see that you as the local producer, or the person who's the local producer, there's so many middlemen before it gets to the general consumer. So there are different avenues that it can go to. But if you are just even, giving it to a local auction, the local auction will take it to a processor. That's another fee. And the processor will give it to a retailer or a wholesaler who then gives it to a restaurant, and then it goes to the general consumer. Each one of those people has to get paid. So if at all possible, if you can cut out some of those middlemen, or if you can work as a cooperative or a group to bring down the price overall, then I think you stand a better chance of making a lot more money. Again, goat meat is still not as heavily marketed as beef or other proteins in the US. So we definitely are needing to work to change that so that we can have more opportunities to cut out the middleman. All right, so you should use an existing marketing channel until you can develop one for yourself. You may want to integrate things such as do direct sales until you can, or do auctions until you can get to a direct sale option, or you can partner with other segments of the market. So if you know a slaughter facility and you and your neighbors can get together and say, hey, I can definitely get, a truckload of goats for you at this time, then maybe that slaughter facility will give you a better price or a better deal because you're giving the volume that they need. So, or if you know that there's a store that will sell local meat, maybe you go and talk to them and say, hey, let's work out a deal. So, definitely understanding your market. All right. So we didn't discuss this at first, but your facilities are really the glue that holds it all together. If you can't keep the animals in, you're definitely not going to make a profit. So your corral should be at least 5 to 6 feet tall. Your boar goats are not really going to jump, but your Spanish, they can clear high fence. So 5 to 6 feet tall, with net wire, 4x4 or 4x4 welded wire should be good. Anything larger than that, they can stick their heads through and then their horns will get caught, and you'll spend a lot of time either clipping your welded wire or trying to do your best to pull goats back through a fence or a gate that they've gotten their heads stuck in. Chute should be about 12 inches wide with smooth sides, slightly curved, but again, if you have Spanish goats, they're going to try to jump out, so just be light on your feet. So you need, and they say well lit uphill movement, but I borrowed parts of this presentation from somebody who was in a different state, so we don't really have a lot of uphills. Some places in Texas don't have a lot of uphills, but if you do, uphill movement kind of slows them down and stops them from running over each other. So if you're going to moving them uphill, it kind of slows down the pace. If you're going to use net wire, 12-inch versus 6-inch wire, and have it 48 inches tall, barbed wire on the top and the bottom. If you're using electric fencing, 3 strands is the best, and you can layer that on top of your, offset that from your netted fence or from your welded wire fence, because the goal is to keep them in, but also keep predators out. Sheds, you should have 5 square feet per animal. I say 3 to 5 square foot per animal, and that's an adult doe. You should have at least 2 sides. Generally, I like 3 because they don't like being wet. They don't like the rain, much like all of us. So that provides ample space and protection from rain, wind, and other options. All right, and I believe this is my last slide, but some predators. Believe it or not, dogs can be predators of goats. I've had one producer that I worked with lost 5 goats at one time to a pack of wild dogs. And they didn't eat them, they didn't do anything, they just ran them back and forth in the stall and until they died. And then they kind of nipped at them until they stressed out. So that's always a possibility. So don't think that, just because there are dogs around, you want to make sure that you keep them safe. Fencing is your best deterrent, or having guard dogs. Anatolian Shepherds are really good dogs to have. We also had, I forgot the other type of dog that we had, but those are good herd dogs. And again, a herd dog is not a pet. I will say this again: a herd dog or a guard dog is not a pet. That animal gets left out in the pasture with the goats. I would say while it's a puppy or if it's young, do not pet that dog. You want it to feel like it's a part of that herd, not a part of your family. When I worked at the Tennessee State Goat Farm, we had our 2 oldest dogs. We saw them, but we hadn't pet them in probably 5-6 years because they stayed with the herd. Whenever we moved the herd, we didn't have to worry about moving them because they knew how to jump the fence and scale the fence. So they will adapt to move with the herd. Another option, if you can't have a guard dog or that's not feasible for you, then nighttime penning. Feed those animals inside a pen, so at nighttime they know they always need to come up. Goats are actually pretty well trained to food, like most people. I know if I hear dinner bell, I'm coming to run. So same thing with the goats. If they know it's about feeding time, then they'll get on a schedule and they'll come on up. Kidding in protected areas, if you know an animal is close to kidding, just keeping them up, not allowing them to go out in the pasture, because if they do go out in the pasture and they go into labor, then they're not going to come up to eat with everybody else and they could be at risk. And then, of course, trap snares are hunting, but if you have animals, you definitely want to avoid potentially hurting, killing, or maiming any of your other animals accidentally while you're doing that. All right, so that was just a quick run through of some general ideas about goat health and marketing. So at this time, I will open it up for any questions.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi.
I'm going to be handling your Q&A. So I'll be reading out the questions from the chat box and then you can answer them out loud. There are a lot of them.
Oh, okay.
Yes, but if we run out of time, I mean, we still have a good amount of time, but if we run out, then we ask you to go into that Q&A box yourself and you can answer individual questions.
Absolutely.
Okay? So I'm going to start at the top from Cruz Garcia. He's asking, what creep feed is the best to use? Which do you prefer or recommend?
I didn't creep feed. So again, that was somebody else's that I pulled from. I don't think we creep feed here at Prairie View either, because we do have lush pastures. So we are raising our animals to do, just free feeding. So I'm not sure because I haven't personally creep fed, but I know that there are some operations who do, but I can look that up for you and get that to you.
Okay. Thank you. So another one is, can these practices, the one you talked about in the first half of your presentation, can they be used for non-meat production animals like llamas or sheep, or is that are those just totally different animals?
Which practices are you speaking about regularly? Are you talking about like the health practices?
Yes, ma'am.
So in sheep, some forms, yes. Again, the medications on that sheet were shown, yes. But each animal is its own kind of beast. Llamas, I would say sheep and goat are probably more closely related, and you can probably use a lot of the same tactics on them. The FAMACHA card is, I believe, specifically for goats, but I think people kind of use it as a good measure for sheep as well. To look into those mucous membranes, it's not for any other animal. I can only verify it for goats. So as far as sheep and as far as llamas and other animals, I don't know if that's a tool that you could use. And then body condition scores, each animal has a different body condition score scale and what's common, because even meat and dairy goats have 2 different body conditions. With a dairy goat, you want them to be about a 2. You want them to be on the thinner side.
Okay. And since you mentioned the FAMACHA card, where can somebody get one of those?
We do have some here at Prairie View. Technically, you're supposed to go through a training to understand how to use the card before you are issued a FAMACHA card. So we used to have a training. Again, COVID's kind of messed some of that up. But we will get with our extension agents, Ronnie and Romeo, who are down there in the valley, and we can get some programs set up in the valley to get you all certified in using those cards and help you getting some issued. But the direct, there's none that you can get direct to the public. And they tell you don't print them out yourself because each printer will print out colors fairly different, and then it may go off on your judgment. So the cards that are laminated that you get from the consortium are the only valid cards.
Okay. So maybe if you're interested in getting one of those cards, contact Ashley and she can direct you to one of her coworkers in your area. We have people from all over Texas here. So
okay,
I'm sure there's someone here.
All right.
A question from Mr. Jorge Peña. What are your thoughts about goats grazing together with cattle year round for purposes of brush management and predator protection?
All right, I think it's a great option and a great opportunity. We're actually setting that up now. We're actually doing a series rotation. It's actually good for a lot of reasons, including predator management, but then also parasite control, because each one of those species has a parasite called Haemonchus contortus, or the barber pole worm, but the one for the goats does not infect the cattle, and the one for the cattle does not infect the goats. So we call it like a vacuum effect. So they'll eat those eggs, and then it doesn't return to the pasture. So then they're in essence kind of cleaning up a parasite problem. But goats and cattle are commonly grazed together. It is not an issue. Again, because goats, they eat the taller, woodier brush or forages or forbs, whereas cattle will graze lower to the ground. So your goats will eat to a certain point, and then you can put your cattle on there, and the cattle will eat the rest, because it's not preferred for goats to eat pasture that is, below 4 inches. They'll start picking up parasites.
Okay, great. And there's a lot of brush in South Texas, so that'll be helpful.
Yeah,
what's the
advantage? Though did great.
What's the typical cost of synchronization and AI? And I'll add a question to that. Can lay people, just goat owners, take on AI, or is that something better left for professionals?
No, there are plenty of, so with any form of AI, I'll answer yours first. So with any form of artificial insemination, a layperson can do it. It's just, are you going to do it properly? Are you going to place it in the right spot? We have an artificial insemination clinic here, and that's what we do. You actually get to impregnate some of our animals, and we let you know if your AI was successful. And some people are successful in their artificial process and others are not. And part of that is just due to live cover is always a little bbit more consistent, or a lot more consistent with conception rates than artificial insemination. So a lay person can do it, but in the beef cattle industry, some people just, if they have large amounts of animals, they have somebody else do it. If you want to get practice, you can purchase all of the equipment yourself, and it ranges because you'll have to get your semen costs, your thermometers, your measuring, all of that stuff together. I would say just to get the setup initially, you're looking at a couple $1,000s. That's just the setup, because then buying the semen is actually the hardest, like the most costly thing, because straws can range anywhere from low grade $50 to $100. You have no idea what you're going to get, to thousands, for prize show goat animals.
Okay, so it's a wide range depending on what you're looking for.
Right.
Okay. I heard somewhere, this is Mr. Juan Lopez, I heard somewhere that a cabrito is one that is only fed on milk. How do you reconcile your approach for this market?
So they said the cabrito is the one that's only fed on milk?
Right, is that true, or is cabrito just more of a general term?
We in the industry, we use it as more of a general term. Again, that may be something that is local, as somebody just kind of like saying grass fed versus Grass-fed just means that they have like access to a little bit of grass, not necessarily that they have access to whole pastures. So, sometimes that's just a term where people are trying to set themselves apart, which is fine. You have to find your niche in the industry. But to my knowledge, cabrito is goat.
It's just young goat.
Yeah, little goat.
What's the average age or weight for meat harvesting? Oh no, I lost it. For meat harvesting for a breed like the boars.
An average age, or it depends on your market. A lot of them just do young goats, so they're looking at about 80 to 100 pounds that they're going to go to the market, and they'll be anywhere from 7 to 9 months. For that cabrito, that young goat where it's real tender, you don't want them to above a yearling. Above a yearling, they start developing a lot of testosterone and a lot of stronger hormones, and the males start getting real musky. The females tend to just not be the meat is just not as tender. So if you're looking for what I consider the standard goat meat that people will use in stews and traditional cooking, it would be, your 6 to 8 month old, 80 to 100 pounds.
Thank you. Another question is, how do you feel about cafeteria style minerals for goats? For instance, having individual boxes with different minerals, salt, and the pH balancers. Do you think that's a good idea, or do you recommend a different way to feed those minerals?
I say free feed minerals, because honestly, goats will only intake what they need. So if they are lacking in a lot of minerals, they'll spend a lot of time at that mineral bucket. If they don't really need a lot, you customizing something, if you're doing it for a specific reason, like you have one goat that really has a deficiency and you really need that one to have a better chance, then I would say that would be the only time. Any other time, I would just say loose minerals are better than that salt lick. They are able to pick it up a lot better, and that tub just kind of rotates. Some of them just like hitting the tub, and then they'll dip their head in there, but really they'll pick up minerals as needed. It's not necessarily that you have to force them to pick up minerals.
Mr. Lionel Puga asks, where could I find information on the latest meat goat market demands?
On the latest meat goat market demands, I know that our partners, Texas A&M, they have a great ag economy group, and then they also have a small ruminant specialist who I commonly work with. He commonly puts out market reports, but also I would say reach out to your local auction barn. They generally put out a weekly or monthly report on what they're taking in. And honestly, that's going to be closest to what you are going to get. If you're going to go to that market, you want to know what's going on with that auction barn, with that auction market. So you can sign up for their weekly reports, or some of them just post them online. I generally pull them from online and kind of see what's going on in different areas. Because as you know, San Angelo, their market and their prices are going to look much different because they have a larger volume of goats than if you were to go to, say the Navasota market.
So check your local markets and decide on how far away from where you are you want to go. Okay, so there's a couple questions about organic and naturally and goats that are fed the more natural stuff. Do you know if there's a great demand for that, or are there a bunch of producers getting into organic or naturally raised goats?
So I would say most of the industry is not naturally raised. They could be limited, but because the parasite problem is so large, getting around not deworming an animal is nearly impossible. I had one guy who tried to do it and he ended up just getting out of the business because he lost so many goats so quickly. It's a good faith effort, and that's why what we always recommend is using dewormers as responsibly as possible. Do not deworm every month. A lot of people in the show goat industry, they don't like to see any parasites, but kind of much like us, it's okay to have some parasites present. So, when your herd numbers, when you take kind of an average and you start looking at, okay, this one's down, so I'm going to treat that one. I'm not going to treat my whole herd because one is down. So using dewormers responsibly, and using other medications responsibly or as minimal as possible with targeted animals is probably the best approach and as close to natural as you're going to get, unless you have an extremely closed and confined herd where you are dry lotting them and you're not exposing them to contaminated pastures. So it's not unheard of, but again, as far as is it popular, there's a niche for everything. I never say no to a lot of stuff. I just say, if it works for you and it's making you money, do that.
Yes, two very important aspects. Well, thank you, Ashley. There are a few more questions. So again, if you'll go in there and answer those individually, we really appreciate you being here. It's always great to hear your presentations. And hopefully we'll see you in San Isidro again soon.
Always. Thank you. Gracias.
Thanks.